We're still good friends. From him, I learned the importance of true leadership. On LinkedIn, you can't spend a day without seeing some meme that shows you here's what a leader is and here's what a manager is. And, the manager's got the staff by the feet and they're beating them over the head or whatever. And the leader's saying, follow the way. Those are great metaphorical things, but it's how you put it in practice. And when you're looking for the 16th largest company on the planet, it comes with certain elements of it.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
When I started in B2B, my mentor told me, we call this business to business, but make no mistake, people buy products. Businesses don't buy products. It's people who make decisions for those businesses. Here's where the rubber meets the road with that insight. If you're only focused on businesses as accounts, you're overlooking opportunities. For example, as our latest guest shared in his podcast guest application, track when your customer champions change jobs. That's right, the people. Here to share the story behind that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Matthew Bowman, VP of Strategy, Go-to-Market, and Growth Marketing at ACT. Thanks for joining me, Matthew.
Thank you for having me.
Let's take a quick look at your background so people know who I'm talking to. Just cherry picking your LinkedIn, you've been head of digital content and direct marketing at Allegiance Incorporated, which is now part of Maritz. You've been global VP of digital marketing, Worldwide Center of Excellence at Teleperformance. And for the past year, you've been at ACT. ACT is a 100% employee-owned company with 12,000 employees and 23 offices around the world. And Matthew, in his career, he's managed up to 32 direct and indirect reports and a $3 million budget. And right now, he's in a startup role where he's growing a team. So Matthew, give us a sense. What is your day like now as VP of Strategy, Go-to-Market, and Growth Marketing?
So it's interesting to me when I compare how I spent my days previously at a large multinational compared to what I do now in a startup environment. They're vastly different, even though the goals are roughly the same. Where I'm at now, I think with one big exception, my day is what you probably expect in a startup environment. I spend a lot of my days focused on being in the weeds, working on foundational kinds of activities. Some examples are I frequently meet with our CEO for message refinement. Just got through mapping out the customer buyer journey, developing content for both sales enablement and growth marketing purposes, a lot of marketing ops types projects, such as establishing benchmarks, setting up the reporting system, developing procedures and protocols so we can effectively scale, and even aiding from time to time on the RFP process or event logistics. Now, the one big difference from every other time that I've done this is we now have AI-powered sales and marketing platforms. That single-handedly has really changed how I spend my days. And I'm talking about what's commonly referred to as marketing intent. They're a big data tool, and they give you an awful lot of information. And it's very easy to turn on a fire hose that diminishes the effectiveness of that. But a lot of my time is spent going over the reports and the data that it gives me, because it's a whole different way it allows me to achieve our goals. So, for example, I'll give you two examples. The technology that we've licensed, it shows me how many of our prospective customers are currently in the market and looking at our competition. This creates a stack ranking report of sorts, which I monitor daily. We use this as a new, more comprehensive way to measure the effectiveness of the various marketing activities and channels that we use. And parenthetically, when we launched this in January, because the company is did not have an awful lot of market presence yet, we found that there were only about 30 companies researching us during the week. Well, jump forward 7 months, we went from the bottom quartile of the stack ranking to the number 3 position in the first quartile. And last week, we had over 450 companies researching us. So that's example one. Another thing that this tool does is that it tells me which of our target accounts are spiking on buyer intent. And I spend at least one full day every week reviewing those accounts with our sales team, developing customized plans of attack and so forth.
Lots of you've got going on right now. Let's take a look at some lessons from throughout your career, some lessons from the things you made. So when your PR rep pitched me this story, here's a line she used. I like this. My boss has asked me to produce $1 billion in revenue. Now what? So I'd imagine with that, I mean, that wasn't like just he took you out for coffee and just said that. Like, I'd imagine that's maybe over some time, but give us a sense. What were you challenged with before we actually look at what you did?
Gratefully, that did not come at the beginning of my tenure at the company. It came after we had set up an awful lot of programs and such. And in the board meeting, a lot of these business leaders said, we want to generate $1 billion. And a lot of eyes looked to us and said, okay, guys, how are you going to do this? And because I was overseeing digital growth marketing, it's like, okay, when can you have the answer yesterday for us? It was a bit of a daunting task because it's a matter of looking at how everything scales and how efficiently you are going after your strategy. But it forced us to do some things that I thought were very healthy for us to do. I had gotten, and shame on me, I'd gotten out of the habit of meeting with our customers on a consistent periodic basis. There's so much you can learn by interviewing your customers. Let me give you some examples, and then I'll move on to some of the other things that we did to do that. And ultimately, we did build something. It generated over the time I was there $1.6 billion in new revenues for the company. But one of the elementary things that we did that really had a profound impact on our strategy development was visiting with some of our customers. I like to visit with them about not just how it's going, all the typical questions that you would ask, but ask things like, what's keeping you awake at night? And by the way, how did you find us? What were the criteria you used when you evaluated us? What are the most important things that played into your choosing us? And in your role, what associations do you belong to? What journals do you read, online or print? It gives me a sense for how do I reach these people and what new things do I need to write about, or how do we need to tweak our message? Because one of the challenges that I think a lot of companies have, they've developed a really good template, but particularly nowadays, post-pandemic, things change at a faster rate than they did pre-pandemic. And you have to be able to change with them. And so you still have your core value proposition as an organization, but you need to help them connect the dots, because one of the other changes is that your target audience has redefined the word fast. And people are very impatient nowadays. There used to be, 7 to 10 seconds to get someone's attention on a website. Last time I looked, it's down to 2 or 3 seconds. So you've got to be really succinct, and you've got to help to connect the dots. And you can't do that if you don't really understand your client. And it's just beyond the marketing profile, but what's keeping these folks awake at night? The other thing that you can learn from this, and this kind of ties back to a point you made earlier, is this idea of finding hidden gems. So when I first joined my previous employer, I asked to be set up with one of our marquee clients that's just a household name. And we set up a half an hour interview. I was there with our account manager and the vendor manager who managed the account from the client side. Our vendor manager, bless her pointed head, spent 25 of our 30 minutes going through all this mundane routine stuff about how many phone agents we had supplied and the different programs. recognizing my window of opportunity was closing very quickly, and based upon the information I had learned, I asked the client, well, what impact have you had on your business outcomes from working with us? And her response was phenomenal. This is what every marketer wants to hear. She said, I give you the lion's share of credit for helping our company go from literally the very bottom to literally the very top of the J.D. Power and Associates customer satisfaction ranking, all the while helping us achieve the lowest customer churn in our company's history. That should have been on a billboard. Our CEO didn't know it. The chief business development officer didn't know it. I asked her, can I quote you? She said, yes. It's like, okay, we have a new client reference, a powerful one that we can then use to arrange for speaking engagements, case studies, co-authored papers. There's so many different ways to use that kind of information. So that's kind of my soapbox on really understanding your client and the value that comes from that. Other elements include.
Well, let me ask you about that. So you talked about really understanding your client. One of your lessons was message trumps channel. So was in interviewing the customers, is that the right way you tweak the message? You said the value proposition stays the same, but I assume the message around that can change.
It can change a lot, and there's a lot of nuances with that change. Now, message trumps channel. That's applicable in so many ways, particularly right now where an awful lot of marketing budgets are getting cut and you're forced to use antiquated channels, out-of-date technology. Maybe you have to cancel some of your brand new contracts with your social media vendors. What I've learned through this whole process is if you get the message right, it doesn't matter if it's email or if it's a paid ad, you're still going to dramatically increase the results that you're getting. Now, in my case, what we did is this actually happened to be part of the call to generate $1 billion is we went through and completely revamped and transformed our outreach program. We changed the tonality. Now, keep in mind what happened during the pandemic. Everyone started to use email again. And our audience was just flooded with emails. We had so much more noise we had to break through. And so we changed it. Instead of using the standard sales marketing email template, as the example goes, because everyone else was using it, they Googled what the latest template was, and they all started to use it. We completely shifted. It was more conversational in tone. It was written from one senior executive to another. And it had dramatic payoff. Still, it was still the same old lousy email channel that we had to use because of budget cuts of our own, but we were getting way superior results to that. And in fact, the email channel, the whole program we put together using that approach, we did some analysis and my team ran the numbers for me to compare what are the conversion ratios, the Google ads and LinkedIn, and compare that to what the conversion ratios that we're getting with our own internal demand generation system. And it turned out that at that time, it was 443% more effective than Google ads and 130% more effective than LinkedIn ads in terms of the ROI. How many actual quality leads we're getting out of it per dollar spent.
Well, let's get an understanding of exactly what was in that message. Because when everyone listening here is that effective, they're going to want to do it as well. From what it sounds like you're saying is like, people were sending generally generic automated, mass messages. It sounds like you were personalizing them more. So what I would ask is, well, so that's one thing, there's a change to the message, but also I would assume there's a change to the operation to be able to send out emails like this. So can you kind of fill us in a little more about like what it said and then how you were able to get the information to say that operationally?
Sure. So the messages, we went from pre-programming 6 months worth of communications down to 2 weeks.
Yes. Okay.
The world was changing very fast. Because I already had an extremely good relationship with our head of sales or the president of sales for the English-speaking world, when it came to our English-speaking outreach, I'd meet with them almost on a weekly basis. It's like, okay, what's keeping people awake at night for this industry? Now, you hit on something really important. We did this by vertical. It was a lot of work. At the
Yeah.
time, we were chasing 35 verticals and sub-verticals. So it wasn't just banking and finance. It was large banks, mid-tier banks, credit unions, fintech, for example. And so we were being very granular. At the time, I had the team to be able to pull this off. But we were being very granular in what we were talking about. And because everything was changing so fast, we would talk about what was keeping up awake at night right then. For example, this is the time when all of a sudden you saw help wanted ads on the front of McDonald's and Chick-fil-A saying, hey, we'll pay you $15 an hour to come work for us. Because this was the time of the Great Resignation. And there were no workers in the United States, it felt like. And a lot of our clients were feeling the pain. So we hit upon that. I said, you know what? We can help you do that and help you save some money. Yes, there's a little bit of offshoring because this company was a business process outsourcer, but it was applying our solution to a very real current painful problem that was killing them. And so we would hit that. And we got to the point where, it started off taking a week to turn around these campaigns. We got so efficient at it. We were sending out communications within 24 hours after my talking to the president of English speaking sales. It was just turning this around very quick. We also made some changes because I started to do the writing. Now, that's not something you can necessarily replicate, but because of my background, I've been a senior level executive ever since I graduated from MBA school a long time ago. I just know how to talk from one senior executive to another. And that was part of the tonality that we changed. Can you replicate that? Yes. You can replicate it from the standpoint that understand what your verticals and sub-verticals are, understand what their pain points are, understand their vernacular. How do they talk? What terms do they use? Don't throw your industry jargon at them. Talk in terms that they can understand and connect the dots for them. Don't assume that because you present, hey, we have all these awards and we're the best at what we do. Everyone says that. You've got to tie it down to the grassroots level of this is how we can help you specifically. And then in terms of being able to send it out, we happen to have a tool. At the time, we were using Marketo, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners already use, or one of their competitors, that allowed us to do that. And so we were very quick at being able to send these communications out to our database and then track the results and see how it went. Now, what was interesting with that was when we made that shift, I actually have a page of screenshots where people actually thanked us. You don't get that very often as a marketer, where the recipient of some communication that they didn't want to see because they're so busy wrote, "This is great. Thank you very much."
So that's a great example of reaching out to people in your database or that you can reach out to currently. One of the things you were talking about earlier sounded to me like account-based marketing vaguely. And as I mentioned in the opening, sometimes with account-based marketing, we're a little too focused on the account, the business itself versus the people in it. So I like this next lesson you said, track when your customer champions change jobs. So how did you do this and what did you learn?
Okay, so I learned this because I made a habit of attending sales meetings. I learned so much from just listening. I always had a report I had to give on a weekly basis of how things are going with the support, with the sales enablement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of it was just listening for ideas because they were the ones in front of customers every day. And so I would listen for, hey, there's a challenge they're having, there's a problem they can't solve over here that we can help them with or whatever. And in this particular case, I heard about a client who they had just changed jobs, and within a couple of weeks of starting a new job, they contacted us and said, "Hey, we want you to submit a bid." Well, light bulb went off, and I had my team do a deep dive on our database, and we had extensive data at that point, and I was comfortable with the quality of the data. And what we discovered is that in that industry, what were the exact stats? The executives that we were dealing with, they had a tenure of about 3.5 years, and they have changed jobs. And 61 or 62% of the time, they would change jobs, similar industry, also an account that we were targeting. So I recognized, hey, there's something here. We can potentially proactively create serial clients. And then the other element of this was when you, from a business perspective, once you look at how much time, money, and effort goes into developing a relationship with a business leader to the point that they select you, at least in the B2B world where I compete, you're looking anywhere from 12 to 18 months and thousands upon tens of thousands of dollars in some cases of taking them to events, getting a box booth at a special event, so you're trying to court them, and all the things that you do over time. That's a huge investment. And once you get them as a client, it's criminal just to let that go. Now, here's how it falls apart. Your salespeople typically are going to be very good. So they'll, at least the better salespeople, they're going to monitor that and see when the person changes jobs. LinkedIn does that for you already. But the problem is if they go to an account owned by another sales rep, odds are that sales rep is very busy trying to meet their own number. They don't take the time to say, hey, this person just joined your account. Let me introduce you. That doesn't happen. No criticism of anybody, but it's just because everyone's so busy. And so we started to monitor that and we systematized it so that we knew exactly when people in our database of 100,000 plus were changing jobs. And then we would immediately and automatically send out a follow-up. We'd alert the new salesperson, say, okay, this is the person that just changed jobs that you just inherited. Here's all the opportunities that they were tagged in. Here's all the conferences and events and webinars that they've been to. And here's the former account manager or salesperson who had the relationship. We connected to, here, would you introduce your prospect to this other sales rep? And the effects were phenomenal because not only was it scalable enough to the point where we actually reduced our sales cycle because, much of the burden, the time involved is developing a relationship of trust. Well, if that's already there, you just shorten your sales cycle significantly. It also reduced the amount of cost, our cost of goods sold from a sales perspective. It dramatically reduced that by like 57%, if I remember right.
Well, let's talk about some of those numbers. And I wonder if you could help us understand how do we track a tactic like this to understand its effectiveness? Because, for example, I interviewed Melinda Marchese, the CMO of Prosper Marketplace, on how I made it in marketing. And one of her lessons was know the numbers and how your work impacts them. And I worry sometimes when marketers hear that we're so focused on performance marketing. And if something doesn't show an instant result and an instant ROI, we're kind of scared because we can't track it and show it so easily. And what you talked about with some really good points, like, hey, we've put a lot of money into these relationships with these potential customers, right? That was a while ago to a different account. Now we're reaching out to them. And you said good things like it shortened the sales cycle, but I'd also imagine sometimes, people when they first hit a new job, they might not be, in purchase intent right away. They might first be getting the lay of the land. So it's not necessarily an instant return. So I wonder, how do you track something like this for effectiveness? Because I think as marketers, sometimes we're just so like eyes down now on just performance marketing only.
Like anything, there's going to be more than one way to do it. Here's how we did it. We set up some customized reports in Sales Navigator of LinkedIn, and we had a specific job change report. We got that to the point where it would run. We would just export that, and we had the list of this week's list of executive who had changed jobs, and the report also shows who the associated account manager or salesperson was. And we also did some customization. And when it pushed into our CRM, it also showed us all the opportunities, events they'd already been tagged. So we automated as much of it as we could. And gratefully, Sales Navigator integrates with a lot of CRMs. So this is something, if you have a somewhat tech savvy team, you can figure it out and pull that off. That's the majority of the work right there. Then what we did is once this would come in and get pushed to the CRM, we automated these alerts. And then we would just populate the alert email with, here's all the information you need to know, and push that out. Then the next step we did is we automated the reports. We came up with an exception report. We would send these things out as they happened real time. But then on a weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis, these exception reports were being sent out to their sales managers with them in copy, because it was very quickly recognized this is a gold mine that we're sitting on, because we're saving money, we're shortening cycles. We can very easily create serial customers, especially with our very happy customers. And there's absolutely no reason for a salesperson to not jump all over this within 24 hours of being notified. And we would send these exception reports to the managers that said, okay, well, here's the person that as a decision maker that used to be here, now they're here. And this was sent to your sales rep on this date. And as of this day, they have not followed up. And then the sales managers were obviously motivated to jump all over it, because this was a heck of a lot more effective than chasing leads at a trade show.
Yes, hit it where they are. So that's a great example of just showing sometimes, we just talk about these ideas and so it's a good idea. Well, now how do I act on that? That's a great example of putting it into process. And I want to ask you another one of those type of questions, because another one of your lessons was to interview your customers. And you pretty much already told us a story, how you happened to be in that meeting. You got that great testimonial from a customer. But I wonder, how do you systematize that practice, right? Because, and sometimes I think when we're talking about interviewing customers, it's not as hard as some companies think. And let me tell you why. I interviewed Christian Javago before, and she's a great expert in this. And one of the things she often says is, within 5 or 10 interviews, you can start seeing patterns from customers. Like, you don't have to interview every single customer, but you still do have to set up a process. You happen to be in that meeting, as you talked about. You had those last 5 minutes, you jumped in, you asked that question. That was great. But then how do you take that and not just have it be a one-off? How did you systematize it across your organization?
There's a couple of different circulating thoughts on that idea. One is to do surveys. There's the voice of the customer. Those certainly have their value, and I certainly recommend getting that. Very valuable. But what those voice of customer surveys lack is your ability to do what you're doing with me, which is you hear something interesting, and then all of a sudden you're going down another path that you did not intend, and you're asking questions, and all of a sudden you're finding out this customer is well-spoken. They have an amazing story. I would desperately love to get them on a webinar or in front of clients or something like that. So there's a human element. And by the way, I always have fun interviewing clients. I really enjoy that aspect of my job. We would just once a quarter, we would interview one from each of the verticals that we were going after. And I agree with your other guest. You do start to recognize patterns in everything after a while. But, frequently, and I couldn't tell you the odds, but frequently you're going to hear a story that's like, how come we have not been talking about this yet? And it's a great story. Another example is with my previous employer. We went out to the contact center, which for that company, that's their product, or it was a contact center. And I learned that what we had done was find a new way to generate sales for this beverage company. And the guys inside were like, yeah, no big deal. You just revamped how our client generates money, and they've generated, I forget the numbers, it was quite a large percentage growth in revenue. And while we lower the cost, it's like, guys, this is a big story. We're not telling this. So there's those kinds of elements of it as well. The same thing with my current employer. As I interview our clients and subsequent account managers, I'm hearing so many stories that have not been circulated of amazing efficiencies, turnarounds during recessions, and all kinds of amazing results that they're just dying on the vine because no one thought to ask the questions and to publish it. And then the next piece, which you may or may not ask me about, is once you get that, there's a rule of 5. There's 5 different things you can do with that information. Put it on your website, put it in the blog, put quotes in the paper once you get their permission. They become a resource for sales referrals. Sign them up at a trade show or a conference to have them speak about their experience. There's so many ways to leverage that information.
Yeah, and I like what you say too, comparing it to surveys. So this is something I did earlier in my career. I would interview customers. And one of the differences, like with a survey, surveys are good, they're helpful, but like you're putting a lot of the onus on them, right? They got to go, they got to fill it out, they got to do these things. With companies I worked at, when we would interview customers, it wasn't just getting the information, it was partly making them feel special. Like they were a star to get interviewed. They go out to a nice dinner, we bring them to a big industry event, we do it there. And then there's a different human dynamic that happens. And like you said, it's 2, 3, 4 levels down when you're in the follow-up questions where you really find the gold. So I love that. Obviously, I love interviewing. I'm talking, but I love that lesson for everyone. Get past get past that digital screen all the time and actually talk to human beings. And in the first half of our episode, we talk about some lessons you learned from the things you made, which we did. The second half, we are going to talk about human beings. We're going to talk about lessons you learned from people that you collaborated with. But first, that I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MechLabs AI, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. You can build your artificial intelligence strategy with an AI quick win intensive from MechLabs. Learn more at intensives.mechlabsai.com. That's intensives.meclabsai.com to get direct help building out your artificial intelligence strategy to better serve your customers and improve your marketing results. All right, let's take a look at some lessons you learned from people you work with. You mentioned, and if I butcher any names, please correct me. You mentioned Lena Victoria Montoya, the marketing operations and performance at Teleperformance, and Eliana Negrasoli, global senior Salesforce administrator, also at Teleperformance. And the lesson you learned was watch for unintended consequences of strategic initiatives. So, what were the unintended consequences, and how did you learn to watch for them?
By the way, good job of pronouncing their names.
Thank you.
So we had been given the task as we grew as a company, and as my role continued to grow. It was a big company. There were 450,000 employees, and we had marketing teams and sales teams in 6 different regions around the world. Each of those regions had their own CEO and their own way of using data. Now, the company had been able to get everybody onto the same CRM, but that doesn't mean there was any uniformity in how they were reporting. And when you're a publicly traded company, you're trying to do roll-up reports or try to be data-driven decision makers, you can't have 5 different ways of identifying an opportunity or a marketing-generated lead. You had to come to some unification. Well, as we went about that, the easy approach would have been, okay, this is how we're going to go do it. We're going to form a little executive committee. And these are now the definitions for the stages of the marketing and sales cycle. This is how we're going to track opportunities and just force it upon everybody. Well, you quickly learn that doesn't work because you get to the point of unintended consequences where you make a decision that you think is good and you think it's going to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, but you're creating more work down the road because you did something that you had no idea it was going to do. And that could take the form of creating an awful lot of work for somebody in one region, or it could be, oops, we just messed up another report we already had because we changed this field in our CRM. And now we just broke 2 reports trying to create this global roll-up report. That happened a lot. And so we went through and we kind of discovered it. And it was both of them combined who knew the database better than me at the time. They were like, okay, well, this is the decision we're going to make. Here's a domino effect. And we had to start doing that every time before we ever called a decision on how we were going to ultimately roll up our database and create a uniform set of definitions and reporting templates and everything.
All right. So this is a challenge as old as time, at least as old as sales and marketing time, right? How do you get sales to update the CRM? And so I wonder, you talked about interviewing customers to better understand customers, to serve them. Are other employees, yes, they're employees of the company, they are internal customers as well. And I wonder how your sales experience helped inform this. And while you're thinking of that, I want to mention too, we can think internal employees, well, we just tell them to do the thing and then they will do the thing. But they are human beings with their own free will and it will not happen. And I was reminded of this. I did a case study about a consulting group, right? That really had a hard time. They're trying to, a consulting group, your employees are so key to your value proposition and how they had to find a value proposition so that those consultants understood why they should share on social media, ultimately helped grow their personal brand. But then, the whole organization grew. They were able to grow web traffic by getting those key people out there. So I wonder if you can give us a sense of, from your sales experience, one, how you're able to empathize and kind of communicate to that sales force. And then also two, tell us why you aren't in sales anymore.
Okay. Two big questions. Okay. So you're right. Whenever you're doing something like this, you have to take into account human tendency. People are busy, especially salespeople. They're coin operated, as they should be. And they're going to be doing those things that make them money. And if it's just an administrative thing, you have a limit of how much they're going to do before they balk and say, I'm not doing that anymore. So it was a combination of things. One of them was we automated as much as we possibly could. So when we did come to a consensus on here's our unified global set of definitions and reporting, and all the CEOs and all the heads of sales were on board and they agreed with it. We then programmed our CRM so that only those variables would be accepted. We were what used to be an open text field was now a pull down menu, and certain reminders are just built in so that it helped with the uniformity of the data entry. But the thing is, when you get a bunch of people who are like, this is all new, I'm not doing this. I got to go to a client call. Well, how we overcame that element of it was because I had a very good relationship with the president of sales for the English-speaking world, we're still friends today. The guy's a fantastic guy. This was part of his initiative. And he simply stated, and this is one of those top-down things you have to have for support, is, and he said this several times in sales meetings, if it's not in our CRM, it doesn't happen, which means you're not getting paid a commission on it. That got everyone's attention very quickly. It's a bit dramatic. It was actually his idea to do it, but I saw the effectiveness of it, and everyone sat up very quickly.
And okay, before we start talking about sales here, you mentioned that you were the head of sales and marketing at one point, and then decided that sales should not be part of your role. Do you want to take, there's also that human element of that. You want to take us into that?
All right. Yeah. So let me take a step back just a little bit. I did not start my career in marketing and sales. Believe it or not, I actually started my career in finance, in accounting. That was my degree out of college. It wasn't until I got my MBA a few years later that I was going through and I realized as I was taking a bunch of marketing classes that I found this fascinating. This is kind of that science and art combination that I really like. From there, that put me as head of sales and marketing for a couple of Inc. 500 SaaS companies. And when you're involved with sales, you're on the road a lot. You become a road warrior in many industries. And I was. At the time, my twins were just about 2.5 years old. And I had just come home from like a 2.5 week trip where I'd been gone the entire time. I took a red eye to get home, climbed into bed about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. Shortly after I got comfortable, one of my twins got up and started to cry. So I haven't seen my son in 2.5 weeks. So I just went down and kept the light off and went in to check on him. And the sweetest thing happened when I walked into that dark room and he saw me. He stopped crying and he got a little smile on his face. And as I got near his crib, he held up his hands and he touched my face to make sure I was real. It was that very second I decided I was going to do a career path change and focus exclusively on marketing because I didn't have to travel as much.
Yeah. So when we talk about, sometimes for marketing, we get so frustrated with sales, just fill out the darn CRM and work these leads. They're good leads and all these things. It is always good to have that empathy. I remember I worked with a company that had quarters that started a month later than is typical. And because of that, October 31st was a quarter close. And I always felt bad for those sales reps because they were trying to close that business and they're out with like their kids trick or treating, but they're still trying to close that deal this quarter, you know? And it's like, you got to empathize with them a bit. Speaking of priorities, so there's priorities in life, there's priorities in work. One thing you mentioned you learned was to prioritize with the RACE method of decision making, which is return, amplitude, conviction, and energy. You learned this from Jesner Filoso. How did you learn this lesson?
Yeah, now the RACE model for decision making is a really good model, particularly when you don't have all the data and you're not quite there to that quote unquote data driven decision making department. It helps you prioritize which projects that you have. And it's based upon the very well established philosophy that 80% of your results come from 20% of your programs. That's true in marketing and sales. It's true in operations. It's true in customer service. So how do you decide which of the 20% of your initiatives do you want to focus on? So let's break it out. You already said what it is. RACE, return. Projects that have a clear return on investment and impact should be prioritized much higher. As you're evaluating, we have limited budget, limited resources. What are we going to focus on? So that's one. Amplitude. It's the broader the scalability and the reach of the project, the higher the priority. So if it's real narrow and it's only going to benefit a little bit, probably drop that priority. But if it's one where it's obvious, it's going to scale easily, it's going to have a broad impact, again, hike the priority on that project. C, conviction. Initiatives with fewer uncertainties and more predictable outcomes, meaning less moving parts, the more likely that program is to succeed. Again, increase the prioritization of that project. And then there's energy, and this is the only one that goes the opposite direction. Projects that require less energy and effort have a higher chance of success. So the more energy it takes, deprioritize it. The less energy it takes to pull it off, skyrocket that one up. Now, if I may, related to this, there's one more element of this that I think is important to the discussion of something that I've learned. It's executing on it. So this tool will help you identify those projects that have a higher likelihood of success. I've been in my career long enough that I've seen a shift in corporate America, well, global corporate companies, where when I first got out of college, it was not uncommon to go through a several-day orientation, particularly for a bigger company. My first gig was at Varian Associates in Palo Alto. And even though I was just a low-level accountant at the time, they still spent an awful lot of time with me and my incoming class. This is what it means to work at Varian. This is what you're expected of. You know, it's kind of like we're corporate citizens. Here's what we expect from you. Honesty, integrity, and here's the values that we incorporate. And then as you got promoted, they taught you, okay, here's how to be an executive. Here's how to lead. The challenge is a lot of the big business schools, even Stanford, where I went in some cases, they don't necessarily teach you how to execute. They teach you how to develop strategy, and everybody comes up with strategy. I'm going to maybe misquoted. I forget who it was. It was one of the big consulting firms talked about the percentage of strategies that fail, and it was something like 80%. It's ridiculously large numbers because people, leaders, aren't taught really how to execute. That's where the RACE program comes in handy. But the key thing where I'm driving with all of this is being able to differentiate between those initiatives that you can call this like a pencil whip, where the team has the skills, resources, and everything they need to pull off this project A. That's great. Those are easy to do. It's the other ones where a lot of leaders don't recognize my team doesn't have all the skills. We may need to hire somebody. We may need to upskill some of our people to pull this off. And we're looking at having to dramatically change the behavior of our team to pull this off. Those have to be managed in a very different way with very different expectations. They take longer. The measurements you use are going to be different because you're having to measure, are the new behaviors being put in place? Once you figure that out, you'll be a much more successful executive of any type.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing you're talking about too, I think partly just comes from experience. You see so many things fail, you kind of understand why they fail, and hopefully you get to the point to their succeed. And you have one interesting experience that I wanted to mention. You talked about going to Stanford, but even before that, you grew up in Silicon Valley and you were around some pretty accomplished people who were accomplishing. I mean, they created what Silicon Valley is. They created probably what the tech industry and many other things are in America today. And I wonder if any of that, if you realize it or even don't realize that was baked into you at that young age that then helped you go on in your career, anything that you were around. Because for me personally, I didn't really grow up around the marketing industry, but I was a paper boy when I was like 9 years old. I started. And at the time, I never would have made the connection, but I realized that was back in the day when, now it's like there's an auto charge on your credit card for, a paper subscription, right? Easy peasy. Like when I was a kid, I was 9 years old, I'd do door to door, knock on every door and ask them for like the $1.10 or whatever it was every week, and if it went really well, I'd get $1.20 and get a tip or whatever it was, And so, I mean, that taught me how to make an ask, how to word it differently. I didn't even realize I was probably experimenting with different ways to do the ask and then those sorts of things. And so sometimes I feel like we have these kind of foundational learnings that happen before we even get to college or grad school or that first job that we don't realize that were baked into us. So with you, I mean, that is just such a phenomenal experience. I would have to think to grow up in Silicon Valley at that time. Was there anything you think you learned from that we could learn from?
Yes, definitely. So Silicon Valley, there's a lot of amazing places on this planet. Silicon Valley was a fascinating place to grow up when I did. Born and raised there. 4 houses down was Bill Landers, one of the Apollo 8 astronauts. Silicon Valley is full of people who quite literally have changed the world or made their mark on history. Bill Landers was one of those people. And meeting people like that, it's a fascinating experience, particularly as an impressionable boy at the time, to hear and learn about this guy and talk to his kids. And it opened my eyes to something that we did as a country that was really cool, which is beyond just the manned space program. It opened my eyes that subsequently that sometimes art and science do work together to create some really amazing things. Now, I didn't connect it to marketing at the time, but it opened my eyes to that. And I started studying science and I started to go to other paths. It was very interesting and it did change me. And a number of subsequent changes and course corrections later, I'm in the MBA program and I'm getting my graduate certificate in marketing. And I'm starting to see, there's the art creative side of marketing. And then there's the scientific side, the neuroscience of selling. That's part of this. And watching those two blend together was just fascinating. And I absolutely loved it. And I still do. I still study the neuroscience of selling. I actually took the Sandler sales training program because it teaches you all about how people think and how people are wired. But at the same time, I went and I got certified in Six Sigma because that's kind of the science side, being able to manage large groups and large programs. Did my postgraduate work at Stanford. So, it very much shaped my future career path and the things that I find interesting.
I mean, one of the things I think about when it comes to Silicon Valley too, not just those accomplishments, I mean, Apollo as well, is the scrappiness factor. There is a certain scrappiness factor of like, let's figure out how to get this thing done and maybe change the world with it. So it's interesting when it comes to your next lesson. You said generate buzz with guerrilla marketing. When I think of guerrilla marketing, I think of scrappy. You've talked a lot about some of kind of the bigger kind of corporate initiatives, bigger, more structured initiatives. Guerrilla marketing can be a bit shoot from the hip. You said you learned about it from Paul O'Hara and Rory Stark. So I wonder how you learned this from Paul and Rory and how you used it.
Okay, so both Rory and Paul, they're British citizens. They were colleagues of mine previously. Great guys, and we just had a blast together. We traveled a lot. We literally went around the world. We went to China, all over Europe and India. We put hundreds of thousands of miles in an airplane together. Both are extraordinarily smart. and they understand people really well. And they're both really good at finding, I wouldn't say loopholes, but ways that connect to people that are kind of outside the box. Because I had a graduate certificate in marketing, a graduate degree in marketing, basically, I was very much formalized, because the science side of me is going to follow this process and we're going to go down this path and everything's going to work out wonderfully. Well, that's great for about 5 seconds. And then reality hits. And you're finding that, all right, well, I didn't anticipate having my budget cut in half and to lay off a few people, even though I'm still responsible for the same number that I was before. I wasn't anticipating the channels that I used to be completely oversaturated, and people are sick of them. And now I'm getting diminishing returns on all these programs. And we're a publicly traded company, so still have to come up and meet our numbers. There's just no excuse not to meet your numbers if you want to keep your job, right? So they came up with some really innovative ways of using social media to be able to reach out and engage prospective customers. They also came up with some really cool ways of getting people to an event when there's webinar and conference fatigue, and doing organic grassroots kind of growth, finding ways to help your target audience feel like it was their idea. This is their initiative. They came up with some fascinating ways to do it. And I would take it as, this is great. I'm going to run with this. And I try to scale it. And but both of them are very scrappy and very bright and are able to come up with these really cool ways of reaching target audiences.
Could you give us a specific example of maybe what one of those most impressive campaigns is that stuck out to you to kind of give our audience ideas for guerrilla marketing? Because I think when it comes to guerrilla marketing, people think of two things. It's either simple thing, like you said, just, we'll post stuff to social media and then people will act. But, organic social media is very hard to break through. The major platforms aren't making money from organic social media, right? Or they'll go on the flip side and they'll do something totally radical that might even hurt or destroy the brand, like a protest that just isn't a good fit for the brand, like a fake stage protest or something like that. So I wonder, can you add, any thoughts come to mind about one of the specific campaigns that really stuck out to you and how it broke through the noise?
Yes. Now I can give this one because, frankly, this technique has probably been overused at this point. I feel uncomfortable saying what they're currently doing because I don't want their great ideas to be, used by everybody else. That's not my place to give those away.
Absolutely.
But one of them that worked a handful of years ago, there was a very large international company that we wanted to do business with, based in the Netherlands. And try as we might, we just could not get their attention. We tried everything. And we, at the time, had the budget to do all kinds of crazy things and nothing was working. So my friend Paul, he decides to do some research about this company, and he finds how they've become a little innovative with the digital aspect of the retail business. And so he found an article written about it, and then he repurposed it. He posted his own comments. Now, he had just reached out and connected on LinkedIn with some of the key decision makers he wanted to meet with. So he wrote it. It was very much an ego stroke. It was, man, you guys are great. Look at this amazing stuff you're doing. He didn't write it for the world. He wrote it for them to read. He tagged those people on LinkedIn, and they started to tag each other. And he reached out and was finally able to get a conversation. That first conversation led to an opportunity. And within about a year and a half, they were a client.
Well, one of the nice things about that is it's not a mass message. Like I get so many LinkedIn outreaches, right? And at least make an effort, at least personalize it. That's the great thing about LinkedIn. It's this beautiful database where you know all this, and people are choosing to update all this information about themselves and telegraph it to the world. Like, if you remember before LinkedIn, there were these database companies, of course they still exist, where they would have to manually try to figure this out, call around and try to figure, where do you work now? Let's update that. Where do you work now? Everyone's sharing that with the world, and they're sharing everything they care about. If you're going to market to them on organic social media, at least understand them and try to target it to them.
Yes.
Let's talk about one more lesson here. This was from Amit Shankardas. You say, form a positive and productive atmosphere to optimize team performance. You were talking about working at a public company. You said, hey, we still got to hit those numbers, right? It can be pretty stressful. So how do you make sure, even in that stressful environment, that you've got a positive and productive atmosphere for your team?
Indeed, and that is the one name you butchered. Amit Shankardas.
Well, I had Matthew Bowman. That was so easy. I know I had to butcher something.
Yeah, so Amit Shankardas.
Thank you.
We're still good friends. From him, I learned the importance of true leadership. On LinkedIn, you can't spend a day without seeing some meme that shows you, here's what a leader is, and here's what a manager is. And, the manager's got the staff by the feet and they're beating them over the head or, whatever. And the leader's saying, follow the way. Those are great metaphorical things, but until you put it in practice. And when you're working for the 16th largest company on the planet, it comes with certain elements of it. And this is true, I guess, of most companies. When you're a team leader, nowadays it's very likely that they could get distracted by company politics, by artificial deadlines, by a changing environment that makes it very difficult to be productive because people are constantly stressed about vaguely disguised threats as just the things that everyone, I'm sure, can relate to, that they have witnessed at one point or the other in their career, or they're experiencing it right now. Being part of Amit's team, he learned, or he sheltered us. He wasn't trying to keep information from us. That's different. He protected us. He would negotiate more reasonable timelines. When something was a really stupid request, he would just outright say no. He would take that risk as a leader to protect us because he recognized, I'm not going to set my team up for failure. And all of this bouncing back and forth with different priorities, artificial fire drills, and those kinds of things that are becoming more and more prevalent in today's business environment, those are all productivity killers. They're all morale killers. And, everyone knows that if you're going to have a highly productive team, they need the environment where they can be effective, productive, and you're doing things to help their morale. So not only would he shelter us from all that noise and only pull us in when absolutely necessary, and being the expert marketer that he was, he would really reposition it well for us. He didn't repeat it the way he heard it. He would reposition it in a way that it came across positive. And then he was really good at just doing the one-on-one to make sure we were okay during stressful times when we had to work long, late hours. He's like, how you doing? Can we do anything? In fact, there was one time, I don't know if I still have it. I was stressed. We hadn't taken a vacation, in this case, because it was during the pandemic, we hadn't taken a vacation in 2 years. And we were exhausted from working 6 days a week. And we were accomplishing some amazing stuff, but we were exhausted. And he could see it on my face that is like, I don't want to talk to you right now. I'm heads down. Just let me do my job. Well, there's these squishy balls. So I have a little smiley face on them and they're foam, and you can squeeze them to get rid of the stress. He sent me a whole bag. It made me laugh. It's like, okay, this guy's a great leader. So that's a really important lesson, I think, when we're dealing with today's environments, particularly when there's an awful lot of leaders who have not received an awful lot of formal training on effective leadership, and you kind of see firsthand some of these less than desirable practices of a hammer instead of a carrot, and learning how to protect your team from that so that they can be at their optimum best whenever possible is a valuable lesson.
Well, let's talk about protecting your team. Let's kind of take this full circle back from where we began, where you mentioned, okay, you were tasked over time with generate $1 billion. How did you communicate and manage up about that overall project and the results to kind of keep the heat off your team, so to speak? Because when you talk about, hey, there's all these fire drills, people are asking all this stuff of us. I mean, a lot of those reasons are because they probably don't have a good understanding of what's going on inside that team. And the tough thing about being in marketing and sales too, but in marketing, everyone thinks they're a marketer, right? I had a colleague, I love it. He used to say, the CEO is never taking a shower in the morning and he's got some idea for JavaScript. Not in most organizations, right? But boy, he'll have an idea for marketing. And, used to feel, kind of, I don't know, maybe a little offended by that. But then I had the chance in my career to work on earnings calls. And boy, if you're on earnings calls, you see why these senior leaders in public companies have to kind of bring this heat down because, man, the heat they get. And it blew my mind earlier in my career. Fast growing company, growing at whatever clip it was, 17%. But if it wasn't growing at 19%, and the street predicted that because there was, some foreign exchange differences, boy, were they getting heat left and right from these analysts. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? This company just grew 70%. That's amazing, right? But that is the reality of a public company. So I wonder if when we go back to kind of that, hey, generate $1 billion, how did you then over time communicate to the right people in the organization who ultimately had to report out to analysts, had to report out publicly to a board and all these things to kind of keep that heat off you and say like, hey, we got this. It's probably not an instant plan. It's a long-term plan, but stick with us. This plan's going to work.
It's not an easy answer, nor is it a short one, but I'll abbreviate it as much as possible. Part of that started before I was ever given that assignment. In developing a relationship of trust with the president of sales for the English-speaking world. That came through having integrity, particularly on the reporting, just having integrity, being data-driven. The old adage is if you don't have data, you just have another opinion, and you're not welcome at the table. So having as much data as possible, being a good listener, knowing that, like you just said, president of sales for the English-speaking world, he was under a great deal of pressure. Some of it wasn't fair. Some of it even wasn't realistic. But knowing that I had his back and I would do everything in my power to help him reach his goal, and that just wasn't a one and done. That was developed over many years of knowing him, of flying all over the world together and having dinners together. And, we got to know each other. So the very first part of the answer was developing that before this ever happened. Then the second part is it's anytime there's going to be setbacks, right? And so anytime there's a setback, is communicating it effectively. No surprises. Your bosses should never be surprised, particularly in a meeting, by something that you're going to say. So if it's not good news, you got to communicate that up front. Don't surprise your boss with it. And of course, you've got to have the answer of, okay, well, using our data, this is where we fell down. This is our approach to fix it. And here's some of the ideas that we considered to fix it. So they know you're not just a one-trick pony. You're thinking about this thoroughly like the business executive that you are.
Well, Matthew, let me jump in and ask, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer? You mentioned a few things there. We've certainly talked about several things from all the different lessons you've had in your career. If you had to break it down, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
I just listed some of them. Let me put it this way. I think the answer to that is evolving. Because had you asked me that 2 years ago, I would have given you a slightly different answer than I would today. But the business environment has changed. Companies, CEOs, CFOs, CEOs, everybody, they're under a lot more cost and financial pressure today than they were just a few years ago. that translates to you directly. So from my perspective, to be a successful marketing executive, first you need to learn to think more like and communicate better with your CFO, your CEO, your COO, etc. And then with that in mind, the traits that I think beyond just knowing your craft is being a data-driven decision maker and being good at it. Like I mentioned earlier, having integrity. If they know you have integrity, they're not going to necessarily call you on the carpet as much when you present your numbers. Have intellectual curiosity. You hear something that's intriguing or a problem that someone talks about, find the answer to it. Particularly when you're in a sales meeting or meeting with a chief revenue officer, and they just mention casually the struggle that they're having. And maybe they'll even put in that many words, but you recognize we're not doing A, so we're not effectively getting B as well as we should. You say, hey, the last time we talked, I sensed this. I have a potential solution for that. The ability to prioritize, the 80-20 rule that I mentioned earlier, be good at that. Of course, the ability to get others to see your vision and to buy into it. If you're not good with numbers, get good at numbers. And then the last piece where we just were is the ability to shelter your teams from unnecessary company drama and politics. Some of it's going to work its way through. It's inevitable. But your team will recognize it, appreciate it. They will be more loyal to you. They're more likely to work harder for you. And you're going to achieve better results the more that you can keep them focused on those things they need to be doing to generate the best results.
Well, I appreciate all the time you've taken with us today, Matthew. Thank you for sharing all the lessons and stories from your career.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.